before we begin. Reviewing the topics of discussion. So, topic 1, housing. The prospect of affinity housing, the 2017-2018 housing lottery, the shortcomings of the entry system for people of color, the presence absence of black space on campus, student faculty experiences with CSS, and Chicago Statement Free Speech on campus. So that's what we'll begin with. Our goals is to gain some wholesome feedback, to develop an accurate picture of the voice left by housing as it is, compiling a report of this, sending a report to relevant administrators, amongst other things as necessary. So, anyone has any thoughts on those topics, which I'll repeat again? The prospect of affinity housing, the 2017-2018 housing lottery, the shortcomings of the entry system for people of color, the presence absence of black space on campus, student faculty experiences with CSS, and the Chicago Statement / Free Speech on campus.
We can't hear you.
The prospect of affinity housing, 2017-2018 housing lottery, the shortcomings of the entry system for people of color, the presence absence of black space on campus, student faculty experiences with CSS, and Chicago Statement Free Speech on campus. Well, that was clear.
Would people like a summary of those things beforehand, or should we like start with like one of those before like just opening the floor for all of those?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the first topic that was read was the prospect of affinity housing, which is something that people have been talking about at Williams for a while. So in the 1970s, the African American Society was a group of black students here at Williams, and they housed a sit-in in Hopkins Hall, during which they started an Africana Studies program here at Williams. And one of the things that they also advocated for was the creation of a black space on campus in which students could live. And we did get a space on campus. It was originally Mears House. We now have Rice House. But today we still don't have a space or any form of affinity housing at all, whereas a lot of our peer institutions do. There have been a lot of discussions in my time here at Williams where people have talked about their experiences in the entry system, in the housing system. And people are interested in some form of affinity housing. And so we're opening up this forum for people to share either opinions in favor or against, reasons why you might believe that we should have affinity housing, or just talking about experiences you've had in the housing system and things that you might want to change. And so we're open to all thoughts related to that or anything else.
Jasmine, so what are some of your ideas that you guys already have when thinking about what affinity housing would look like? Is there a specific house you're looking at, or how that process would look like, or what the process would look like?
That's a great question. So right now there are no clear plans as for what that would look like, because we're still trying to understand what people even want. Like, do people even want this? What would people want in this type of house? And I think the purpose of this forum is to gauge like interest and opinions, just to shape what we should strive for as a whole community, because it makes more sense to strive for something that comes out of what a lot of people are looking for, as opposed to just like our board of 10 people.
But to answer like what that could look like hypothetically, like looking at some of our peer institutions, there's like an application process to be a part of like some form of affinity housing. So at UMass Amherst, they have Harambe, which is like the top 2 floors of one of their towers, and how you would get into that is through an application process, which would be different than the lottery that we currently have, but something that could be applied in that sense. Also, immediately after like the African American Society, like back in the like 70s and everything, initially they wanted to like have, I think it was 80% of black students, or like that proportion in Gladden, in that dorm. So that was like the closest thing there's been to like a pilot system for that here. And maybe even doing it like not pure affinity housing in the sense that like everyone there is like African American or black, but perhaps like, okay, the majority of this house, or like this dedicated space in the house, is this residential space for this group.
I have a suggestion for how we can sort of begin to look at this issue. I have a suggestion. My name is Isaiah, also, by the way. I am the Black History Month coordinator of the BSU board. And the suggestion that I have was maybe we can talk about sort of the other issues that we've put on the table, like CSS, the entry system, maybe the entry system first, so that people can talk about like their experiences of housing and living on this campus now, because affinity housing seems like a solution or how we can move towards it. So maybe we can do like an analysis of our sort of space currently. So I guess we can start about like, what are some of the first year experiences, especially the first years of color, of the entry system?
Hi, hello. My name is Shady, and I'm first year. And I despise the entry system. I think it's ridiculous and disrespectful that they sprinkled us blacks across different entries and expect us to mingle and act like, we all the same when we're really not. And personally, I have 3 white J's, so it's really hard for me to connect with my entry. And like, I feel kind of, alienated because like I can't connect to them on the level that I want to because like we don't have the same experiences. And I'm open to sharing my experiences with people who are not black, but it's like the space is not created within these entries because they're just so white. And I live in Mission, so like it's smaller, but like in Froshquad, I know it's like much worse because like there's a bigger entry, there's more people, and you're just like there, and nobody really talks about it. And it's like, they dance around it, but it's not really talked about. So I just choose to step away from the situation. But for the like incoming first years next year, I think that it would be really important to make the entry system more diverse. And yeah.
First year also. I definitely think that in terms of the entry system, it is that's where a lot of social relationships are supposed to form, and that is how they are structured. And it's incredibly difficult, especially coming in and outside of just race also, because it is hard to connect to my JAs. I have a JA of color, but I don't have any black JAs, so it is difficult a lot of times when issues on campus might arise just for me needing to talk to another person who I feel like could understand and they can't. Also, the background in terms of a lot of my entry, they are white and they are also from prep schools or from private schools, or there are just a lot of things that I experience or that are difficult for me to relate to on this campus that they don't. So it's difficult for me to make those social connections. And then it's also hard because you feel the pressure that I have to like represent in a sense, or that I'm the reason that people are supposed to learn more. And I do not like that being one of 3 people of color, one of 3 black people in my entry of 42. And so it's difficult that it's all on our shoulders to kind of educate everyone else, and I'm still trying to learn and find and be comfortable within myself. So I think that it definitely would have been just to have a JA who is supposed to be, someone we can talk to outside of just the staff. It would have been nice if that person would have been another black person, or if I was just able to be in more spaces that are created with other black people, especially older students here that have gone through experiences, because none of the spaces that I've been in at Williams so far that have been made for me to create social connections have been that way. So I think it would be really great for us to have that kind of system, especially for incoming students.
So hi guys, I'm Aaliyah again. I forgot to mention I'm the BSU co-chair for hockey. So my kind of stance on the entry system was that I personally had a really good experience with it. I think I made some close friends from it. I was actually J last year. the idea of affinity housing. I think I've always kind of thought of it as something that would take place after freshman year, and that's because I think creating this type of housing would, even if freshmen aren't living there, it would create a space where like freshmen could go and potentially see community in a living space where students would always be. One thing we've talked about, like among the BSU board and other people I've had discussions about affinity housing with, is that right now we have a lot of houses like on Hoxie Street or off-campus houses that kind of unofficially serve as affinity spaces for students, like student athletes who are able to pick into those houses as early as 3 years before they will actually be living there. Whereas there are no other spaces that can be claimed by students of a certain identity in that same way. And the fact that people can pick into those houses and like the same teams tend to live in those houses creates a space where anyone that's on the team, regardless of their class year, can go there and find community, whereas we don't really have access to a space like that. And so I would really advocate for some type of affinity house like for upperclassmen, not necessarily freshmen, because I think there is still potential for freshmen to have a positive entry experience, but everyone might not, and there's still ways to make the system better. But I think like if we create that space for upperclassmen, that can really serve all class years of lots of different identities, to have a space where they can meet other students who share experiences and find mentorship.
I'm first year, and when I came here during CVs and I learned about the entry system, I thought it was a good idea. And then I came here and I lived in the entry system and it changed. And the reason why is I understand the importance of building community and connecting with different people. But when you go into that space and you can count the amount of people that look like you on one hand, then it shifts and there's this sense of like tokenization that I find very problematic. And I agree because I feel like as a black person, I consistently on a daily basis face trauma. And I feel like having to consistently teach people, because I feel like in some way that's what the entry system is, right? We're teaching each other our experiences. That kind of recreates that trauma for certain people, and I find that to be reinforcing like certain violence that like at least I feel like I see. And so I understand why an entry system could be good in creating community within freshmen, but I think it's really important to see how a lot of minority freshmen already have disconnected from that entry system. Like I know that I don't really interact enough with my entry, but that came because of kind of like how I felt and that alienation that I gained from it. And I think that like, I think the problem with the entry system is that there's just overall not enough minorities being accepted into the school, because of course we're gonna have to be sprinkled when we can count the amount of like a certain group of color on, you know, like a certain amount of hands, right? So that like in itself is problematic, because it's like, yeah, we should have diversity within entries, but then it's like, if you have so few people of a certain group, then it's like you're gonna have to sprinkle them out, and that in itself becomes problematic. Because somebody who can like sometimes it's like you don't notice as many black people or like other groups of people, and that's why we kind of create our own communities and microcosms within it.
I know a lot of times, like, a lot of people here describe, like, not feeling a part of their entry or feeling like they can count the amount of minority people they see on their hands, but I also just want to point out that we are 50% of this school, and, like, this is our space. Like, we need to make it our space, and we're 50% minority students, and then if we take into account the other 50% that may identify as, like, queer students or first-gen students or low-income students, like, we're adding more of those minority identities. And I just like challenge everyone here to like look besides looking at someone's race or like looking at that stuff, but realizing like we are the majority of this school, like white males are the minority of this school, and I just want to remind everyone that like we're powerful here, whether or not it feels like that, but we like make up the majority of the school. And I feel like everyone should just know that at least.
I'm Joseph. I'm a senior. I think similar to Lee, like I had a pretty decent entry experience. I know it was really rough at first, like not only being one of the few black people in my entry, but also from like a different like economic background as them. So it's like when compounding all these different things, it's like one, like just looking at you at face value, I can't connect. But even when talking with you, it's like, whoa, like we're in two different worlds. Like when it was like time trying to find winter clothing, I'm asking, so what are some good things? Like, oh, bean boots, like this. I'm like, have you seen these prices? Like what do you mean? So I think like the entries, like of course you want to teach one of those experiences, but when you have members who might not understand what it means not only be black, but also come from like a low like SES background, that is a problem. And then one thing about affinity housing, the thing about Hoxie Street, I just think it's interesting how like the process to get to off-campus housing is so complex. And I think these groups end up on Hoxie because they have like these funnels, like they tell their friends how to get to these housing and like, oh, like you apply this year, this is the process. So I think that if, let's say, having affinity housing on Hoxie was an idea, definitely just talking with housing to find a way that all students become more aware that it is possible, even as financial aid students, to live off campus. So, yeah.
Jasmine?
Hi, Jasmine. And I'm a junior, and I'm also a J this year. My freshman year, my entry experience wasn't positive or negative. We, as a group, were just very indifferent to each other. So I could care less about the entry system, but I found like safety, and I felt like I had great JAs who were there who actually cared about me. One of my JAs was a person of color, so I feel like they were already aware that like this system itself wasn't going to benefit me, so that they did what they needed to do to make sure they did what they needed to do to make sure that I felt I at least had a person in the entry, and that was kind of how I wanted to make my entry experience. What I wanted my entry to look like. Less of a focus on I'm gonna make everyone be friends with each other, everyone share their identity, share their experiences, so that we can have a better entry experience. More, but like I feel like that doesn't work, especially going to what Adam was saying, like especially when you have like about 2 black people, or at least like a very small population of like, people of color in your entry. They're gonna be the ones doing the most teaching because they have the experience that's so opposite to everyone else. So as a J, that was something that we were like thinking about and going into, and Shane's my co. So going about like the entry system and being a JA, one thing that we all like discussed amongst ourselves is as a J not wanting to feel tokenized, and in doing that they kind of like they let us be where we wanted to be. They let us be with the co-groups that we wanted to be with, so that then I feel like that disadvantaged the Frosh in the sense that there is only one black JA in all of Frosh Squad, and all the black JAs are in Michigan. And it is my entry, we have 2 black people, and in AP4 there are 3. And I believe there are only like about 6 black JAs amongst everyone. So I apologize for like having that disadvantage, especially for this year, and since it's larger, that has a stronger effect. But I think in thinking about how to revamp the entry system, I think it will help by focusing more on the actual people who are JAs and trying to diversify that population, because that's going to be a lot smaller, because you can't really anticipate how to prevent tokenization in a school where black people are the minority.
I think that's important. I would add to that it's also important to think about like the place that the entry system seems to have within the culture of like Williams. I think as a first year, I remember those first 2 months as I was going through these constant microaggressions, this constant feeling of tokenization, like I had to teach people about every part of my experience, and then also the eventual isolation that came after that. For a while I thought something was wrong with me, because there's like this sort of culture here that everyone's supposed to have a wonderful first year experience in your entries, let's make these great connections with like your JAs and the other people in your entry, and like constantly feeling like I was in opposition to that just because I was having such a negative experience really, I think, exacerbated the feelings of like alienation I had on campus in general my freshman year. And thank God I found Rice House, because I think that's the only reason I was able to survive, was like I think what Aaliyah was saying is like I constantly have this space that I could go to and connect with upperclassmen and feel safe and not have to deal with like these microaggressions or this feeling of alienation, or like being able to feel like I was in a space that was made with me in mind and that was continuously sort of running day to day with people like me in mind. And so I think that's kind of that sort of sentiment, even if it's not a sentiment that every Black student or every student of a certain identity has felt. I think that's one of the reasons why I personally think that affinity housing has some sort of value, is because it provides people with a space to go to, whether or not they're living in that house their entire 4 years or whatever.
Oh yeah, I'm Cleveland. And I also think like moving forward with that like it's important to have like affinity housing in particular, as opposed to only like Rice House, because like affinity housing is like your home, like it's a place to come back to wind down, and like if that space isn't uncomfortable, then like every day is a constant struggle of like wanting to get more exposure to the people that make you feel your best, and that people that you can connect with the best. And like if that can't happen at home, then like it's just a struggle to have to go through. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
So as a sophomore, I wanted to bring up another point of view, is which we're now being recruited to be JAs, and like I personally am very firm on the idea that I'm not going to become a JA, and the reason why is, right, like I was thinking about like Professor Joy James, and she has like this idea of like the captive maternal, and she says, I'm gonna quote, because we're at Williams. It says, captive maternals are ungendered protectors and nurturers of besieged communities, embodied here in the Black female form. Right, and I just brought up that quote because to me, becoming a JA is doing a sort of uncompensated emotional labor, even if I don't want to, right? Even if I say I'm not going to do the labor, or I'm not here to do labor, and even as much as the JA system tries to fool itself to say, oh, you don't have to do uncompensated labor. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because if you're the only Black JA in Frosh Quad, unless you're just gonna say no, like how can you deal with the fact that you have all of these students? And so, like for me, I'm just like unconcerned with doing any form of like of work, right, to have to now begin to do the institution's work, right, in some ways, right? I've now got to deal with like being a therapist, I've got to deal with like creating a home, right? And if we want to talk about the idea of not, like I'm glad that we changed like the gender like cap in our year, and now with the numbers, it doesn't seem like it's a parent, like a household type thing, but it still to me inevitably recreates this household, and now your home, where you live, where you spend a lot of your time, where you sleep, is like this place where you're like this hyper minority. And I think that's where I sort of strengthens the argument for affinity housing, because in the context of me living with Black Frosh, and that's why I push for affinity housing with freshmen, right? Because that's the space where I would be a mentor for first years, right? Because I understand it and I'd be seeking to protect them. And I wouldn't necessarily push for compensation of that labor. But if we're talking about JAs of color in like the next couple of years, my push is to say, this is a labor that I'm doing, and I'm doing it 24/7. So according to the institution, that's like, what, $11 for 24 hours a day? We'll talk about the salary, but that's what it looks like for me, so.
Something else that might be worth unpacking is, what are you going to do beyond your first year experience? In particular, you have the ability now to create some of these homes for yourself. And I think we should walk through last year's lottery and what are the implications of that for people of color. Anyone else?
Yeah. An important note about the last year lottery, I think there are some important things to talk about, but it's the system, they will not be using it next year, so the whole people being able to pick into doubles, that thing won't happen in the future, but we should still talk about it, but just note that it's already a change that happened.
Can Doug like explain it since Doug is here?
Yeah, since you're right there, could you just?
Sure. Okay, to explain the doubles piece from last year?
Yeah, and the gender cap.
Okay. Oh, and the gender cap. Okay. So I understand it, was put into place. It predates me. I've been here a long time. I'm in my 16th year here, but it actually predates me by a couple of years. My understanding is that it was put into effect to keep houses from going, we'll put it right out there, all male, and trying to make sure that there was a balance. I think there were probably at that point some issues with behavior that were being experienced in the residence halls, and the then Committee on Undergraduate Life felt that that would be something that would help address that. And that's it's based on binary, based on male, female, and the maximum is 60% either male or female in a building. That's the gender cap piece, and that's pretty much been held to and been the same for, it's now pushing 20 years. Last year's lottery piece with the doubles, so some years ago, students were allowed to do what we did last year, and what was happening was what happened last year. So there was a rule that was put into effect that doubles could not be taken by a single entrant until all singles across campus were taken. And then at that point, a single entrant could take it, but if you're still in a group of 6 and you had, say, 2 people who were of the same gender, because we don't force non-same gender pairs to live together. If they were of the same gender, then we would say you can't take 2 doubles as 2 singles, you would have to room together. There had been some pressure for a few years to take a look at that. This is more from the older students, rising seniors, rising juniors, feeling that it was unfair to them to not have the ability to get a double single, as students call them, dingles. And so that was one of the things we took into account, because there were a number of rising sophomores who then were getting dingles. So there's a sense of that being unfair. I was concerned that if we went that route, went back to allowing older students to take doubles to themselves first, that there would be some of the problems that I had heard about from 20-ish years ago. Had listened to folks and tried to figure out if it would make more sense that our students now wouldn't do that, and that was one of the things that was conveyed to me. And I was pretty sad to see it go the way that it did. I had some hopes there, and it did not go well, as you all know. So on that piece, we are not going to do that again. We're going back to the policy that doubles can only be taken by pairs until all singles across campus are taken. We're also taking a look at a couple of adjustments to the ways that we're doing the lotteries, thinking about making sure that people who really do want to live together in doubles maybe have a better chance at that. And the upper class residential life advisory committee has been working on that this year. So hope that helps.
I think another thing to think about is how I think Williams as an institution puts a lot of effort in curating a freshman year living experience. And after that, we do have the neighborhood system, but I personally don't feel any allegiance to my neighborhood or any sense of community from that. And so I think one thing to think about is what are some experiences that people have in upperclassmen housing? Do you feel like you're provided with community? Do people like the neighborhood system? Do you feel like you're benefiting from that? And what would you rather see, Cleveland?
First off, neighborhood system. I know the only ways in which I've been introduced to what the neighborhood system is just through the what do they call it? The people at each house that's the housing coordinators. Yeah, that's it. Aside from that, it doesn't seem like a neighborhood. It still doesn't. I mean, it isn't a neighborhood as far as I'm concerned, because it just only been presented to me in the form of one person that has snacks every Sunday, and that's it. But I feel like in terms of community building on the level of the people who are actually living in these houses, that I mean, yeah, like finding the people that you want to live with is important, and like being able to carry that out is also something that's important. So like with this past year, I moved into a suite that is all queer in Horn, and like that's like on a small scale, like what of like a type of affinity housing that's like existing right now. But I mean, of course, like it's only like our microcosm of queer people in like this huge basket of like athletes and other people who just don't fit into like a like monolithic like type of person. I don't know if you want to like speak for.
So I'm Leo. I'm Chinese and Colombian, queer and transmasculine. I'm a sophomore. I'm from Miami, and so last year in my mission entry, I couldn't walk from my dorm to the shower without having my neighbors stare inappropriately at my chest or search for a bulge in my pants. And this made it impossible to enter my hallway without feeling extremely uncomfortable, be it on my way to the bathroom or the dining hall or my classroom or to my work study. And so for upperclassmen housing, it was very important for me to be able to compose a pick group of other queer identified people, because I deserve to have like access to my restroom just as much as my neighbor. And so we composed this group, and so we have a suite in Horn, and now I can come back to my suite and feel like I can leave my door open and mingle with my neighbors, whereas in the entry, I always had my door closed and would wait for people to stop being in the hallway to be able to actually exit. And so now in this space, other queer students here can come and interact with each other with the awareness that like every single person in the suite shares an aspect of your identity that will not be questioned or invalidated here.
There's a hand over here.
Yeah, hi. I'm Sui. Just a couple of things. I think one way of thinking about the entry system is one of social engineering. And I think it's a kind of social engineering that's wrapped up in this idea of Williams' tradition and community. But implicit in this notion of community is an impetus toward integration. And I just want to, I see the administrators here. Hello, I know some of you. I love some of y'all, but I also think it's really interesting that you guys are here, because I think, you know, this is a question of student autonomy as well, getting to choose where we want to live, who we want to live with, what student power looks like, and what real chosen families and communities look like. So I was talking about integration, and I think that there is, you know, there is a, I want to invite us to think about what kind of integration this Williams tradition is structured to move us into. Is it a kind of integration that really provides a kind of equal access for everybody, or is it, and I think it is, a kind of integration that reproduces many of the social inequalities that exist at large in our world, and especially at this college, which, might I remind you, 20% of our college's community come from top 1%, the top 1% of this country. So it's very much, our institution needs to grapple with, you know, the fact that it is designed to produce the next generation of the ruling class. And so how is it possible for us to provide any sort of like, you know, realistic integration in this space, you know, and I think that as we go on from freshman year to sophomore year and junior year, I'm a junior this year, you know, the integration moves from being coercive to passive. And honestly, I'm like, thank you. It's better that, you know, I don't have to talk to anybody in my house. I don't have to, you know, I don't have to like be forced to go to snacks, be forced to be a token of difference. But still, I think this points to the many, many ways in which we can change housing policies in general to allow for a kind of autonomy, student autonomy. And I guess I'll just close by saying that, you know, like, what is cohesion here, right? This ruse of community is something that is generally used to wrap up difference, to erase difference, and to convince us that we're all the same, when in fact, we're not all the same. And it's important to interrogate difference and what those differences produce, what kinds of social tensions and inequalities, and most importantly, violence. And I think that is at the core of my issue with the JA system. And I think, and I absolutely, I think many Asian American students on this campus, although I can't be like, I'm not trying to do that, but as a non-Black student of color, I full-heartedly support affinity housing for Black students.
Hi, I'm Ryan, again, I'm first year. And personally speaking from my first year of experience, I'm still incredibly confused, and I hope that either the staff or any of the upper classmen can explain. We don't have affinity housing, so how are the teams able to like all stay in the same house? I honestly don't understand. And I'm not, I'm just asking the question if somebody can explain to me how that works. So I just don't.
Nobody knows.
Doug, would you be able to explain that?
It's not so much, I guess, that the groups are allowed to do this. And in fact, a few years ago, we did push with both our landlords and with students about not signing leases for off-campus until the fall of your junior year, which is around the time that we typically do the process for applying to live off for your senior year. We've had conversations with landlords, we've had conversations with students. We've also put policy in that says that until you are actually released to live from the requirement to live on campus, until you're actually released to live off campus, that you shouldn't sign a lease. It doesn't keep students from doing it. It doesn't keep landlords from still engaging in doing this. And there is a level to which we, the college, don't necessarily have the authority to be able to say then to students or to landlords that you can't engage in these contracts in advance. The thing that could say that the thing that we do have as a thing we can engage in is that if somebody doesn't get released to live off campus, they're still technically on the hook then for their housing costs and renewal costs. So that's about what we've got at this point. So the houses that the students are going to on Oxy and other areas off campus are truly privately owned homes by local landlords and not then under our jurisdiction. And we do have a certain number of students that we need to have live off campus.
I think, sort of expanding off that, I think the issue that I see is that the de facto affinity housing for athletes still is a thing. It's a thing on campus, and it's a thing on Hoxie, it's a thing off-campus housing in Poker. It's a thing that many of us have had a sort of perception of many dorms on and off campus, so it's not, like Hoxie is not the sole issue. The issue is not that Hoxie exists and that athletes tend to live there. The issue is that in many, many different spaces on campus, there are affinity housing for athletes. Whether it's something that can be changed by policy, we're not sure, but we're saying the fact that it exists and the fact that it has existed for decades is sort of not exactly problematic, that's not the word I'm looking for. Actually, yes, problematic in the sense that like Black students have been asking for some sort of affinity housing for a while. And since 1965, actually, thank you for that. And it's like, while we understand it's not necessarily your policies or like something that like can easily be fixed by policy, we're saying like, because that exists, that's another reason why we think that we should also have affinity housing.
Because I think like there are also pockets of like Black student affinity housing at once. Like there are a lot of suites that are like a lot of Black students or students of any identity that feel like they want to have a community that live together around that identity. That exists. What I see as a big issue is that Hoxie houses exist and create those like off-campus houses for athletes, whereas students of color, if they want that, have to solely rely on the lottery system, or students of any identity other than like the athletes that kind of funnel into these Hoxie houses just rely on the lottery system and have access to any kind of spaces.
circling back to that, I truly agree. Like, I think it's about like what institutional commitments we're willing to do, and I think maybe Liz, maybe you can talk to this, but like I believe we have like we admit more students of color, and then students of color end up not coming to Williams, and I think that's because we don't have these spaces. And if we're willing to make institutional commitments to these spaces, we're attracting athletes because they see that we have pseudo affinity housing, and we attract like right, we have these like multi-million-dollar complexes, Weston Fieldhouse, right? But if we're willing to make this commitment for diversity, then we should make institutional like configuration, so then that way like we can recruit more black students to Williams, we can recruit more students of color to Williams. Yeah, so I don't know if like maybe you want to say like if there's like some stats that you have in your head about like the amount of admitted students and then like actual enrollment.
Yeah, so let's see. So what I can share broadly is that about 45% of students who are admitted to Williams end up enrolling. So we admit usually about 1,200 students each year in order to enroll 550. Those percentages, so we look at them in lots of different ways across students who identify in a number of different ways. You're right that athletes, we yield athletes, so they enroll at a higher rate than non-athletes. Beyond that, across a range of other identities on campus, the yield is actually quite similar. And because affinity housing is not a thing that we talk about with prospective students because it's not an opportunity that students can pursue here, I don't have good feedback from students about whether that particular issue is one that makes them choose other places over Williams. But certainly,
We're telling you it is. It is if we're telling you it is right now.
yeah, no, absolutely, and I hear you. I'm just saying I don't have any data to share on it from prospective students. Absolutely.
Tommy.
Something that I think is also important to note, so I'm with Todd, I'm on the BSU board, I'm the social activities coordinator. And I think that what's important to note about like proxy and like specifically the repercussions for people who may like break that rule like before they're allowed to technically sign into that lease. And also I understand that obviously because it's private property, it's difficult and tricky for the college to engage with it. But by having the caveat or like thing that is like the idea of the risk be like that financial obligation, I think that also makes it only possible for rich white or like rich students to be able to break that. And that like I think the problem here is like it's not even necessarily that, it's like why aren't we actively making it easier for other students to do the same thing and creating the affinity housing? Like it's the issue isn't necessarily, at least for me, that like student athletes can find community together. It's that why are they allowed, and like what are the restrictions placed where they're the only ones that are allowed to do that? At least for me. And I'm not sure like what it would look like if community housing specifically on campus could look like, but it's just ridiculous that like there's no type of option for it outside like what it was outside the lottery system. I think that like, off-campus housing may be like the natural like jump to like creating those spaces.
Oh, I was gonna bring up like a small point of like, I remember, like, I applied to Emory, and I'm pretty sure it was Emory University that like, after we had like to make our decision of like where we were gonna go for undergrad, they sent out a survey, like just like asking us more about like why we made the decision that we made and like what factors went into that. And I mean, I know that like issues with those sorts of like surveys exist, that like could like not very well be like very representative of the data that you're trying to gain. But yeah, cause like for instance, like their survey was really long, and near the end of it, I just like started to click through for the most part. So like that's obviously like an issue. But yeah, just so that like they still got some usable, I'm guessing, forms of data, seeking to know more about like what all happened in your decision-making process thing, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Williams participates in that also. It's called the Admitted Student Questionnaire, and a range of schools participate in that same long survey, so that you can look at both your own institutional data and then comparatively across a set of your institutions. It gets every other year, admitted students are asked to respond to it.
Wait, only admitted students? Oh.
Yes, so it's sent out to all the students who are admitted to an institution,
Okay.
to understand.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So one, like an understanding I want to build off of what Tana said and Sway said. One, that like the Hoxie situation is also an analysis of the fact that 50% of the students are not financial aid. So there's a question that folks can afford it and even afford the penalty that would incur. The other point as well is then saying, right, like so that we can ensure that our conversation can get co-opted, is thinking about like a solution, right? And so when we talk about affinity housing and how we've sort of seen it, for example, poker, right? Last year, there was like around 2 spaces in poker that was like occupied by either a lot more people of color. But what we began to see, and this might be a transition to our next conversation around CSS, is we can see that like the space of student autonomy gets ruptured when the sort of control over spaces are sort of subverted by the campus security. For example, last year 2 students tried to have a birthday party, and just having sort of a holding space, our space gets compromised when we sort of exceed capacity, and we have conversations around capacity and campus security that the BSU will bring up today. When we are too loud, we just see that we attract the police. We're a magnet of the police, of the campus security. I have to make sure I'm clear on my vocabulary there. But that sort of same structure can exist. So again, thinking forward, affinity housing would look like, one, matching the fact that a lot of students of color and students of marginalized identities will not be able to match the capital to create off-campus housing. So if the school were to invest in that, that would be helpful. But again, what that would mean is the change would be the jurisdiction of how easy it is for the campus safety to then infiltrate our space. Personally, I've been in moments where I've like walked into my room and then there was like a facilities person there. Like I was like, wait, I was like the fact that like our personal space isn't sort of, because we don't have the money to sort of go off campus and all, I think that's a problem. So yeah.
That was a wonderful thank you, segue into our next conversation. So recently there have been multiple run-ins between Black spaces, Black students, and CSS, or people who are supposed to be policing the space in some way. And we wanted to bring that into this conversation about Black spaces on campus, whether that's affinity housing or just autonomous Black spaces in general. So just to give a brief summary, so for our Halloween party a couple weekends ago, I don't know if you guys remember that, but CSS arbitrarily changed the capacity for our reservation from 202 to 79, which is why about 30 to 40 students were standing out in the freezing cold in the middle of the weekend, late at night. They issued an official policy to the BSU, USU, WASO, and there were like 2 other groups. Apology. It's an apology. Oh, an official apology to the groups that were involved, but it's still just an arbitrary change that like negatively affected a lot of people's experiences that night. The second thing that happened was at the homecoming party last weekend. And now this wasn't a CSS officer, but it was one of the hosts that the college hired. And in a way, this person was policing the space by dictating who was able to come in and out. So I just want to differentiate. It's not a CSS officer, but they are policing in some way. They were incredibly rude and incredibly volatile with multiple people. They yelled at Bilal. They yelled at me when I walked into the door. Multiple students Sunday morning came up to me telling me about various negative interactions they had with this person, who was very condescending, very aggressive, very abrasive for some reason. And in many ways, so there were strict rules about who could and could not enter that party that night, and we understand that. But from multiple interactions, the interaction I had with them, the interaction Bilal had with them, the interaction a few other students had with them, was them not following the rules that they set for themselves about who could come in and who could not come into the space, and therefore ruining a lot of people's nights. And multiple people told me that they turned away and went home just because this person was either so rude or did not let them into the space, even though they technically checked all the boxes for people who were able to be entered into that space. There were also 2 other events that happened. I don't want to speak on other people's experiences, so if the people involved or someone else wants to explain that, we just want to bring those conversations into the space as well.
Okay, hi, my name is Amari. So I have a story to share with, I had an altercation with CSS on Wednesday. So I was sitting on top of Hopkins, like that balcony area, and I was sitting on the ledge. And I had my earbuds in, so I couldn't hear anything. And the next thing I know, I get like a tap on the shoulder, and they grab me right here, and they like drag me down really aggressively. And once I get my bearings, I asked the guy, why did you drag me down? And he said, we got multiple calls, we thought you were going to kill yourself. And I started thinking, like, is that how you're supposed to respond to a suicidal student? Absolutely not. And since then, like, I jump every time I see a CSS car or like an officer. If CSS is supposed to serve all of the students, it's doing a horrific job because I feel incredibly unsafe right now.
Oh, yeah. I also had a run-in with CSS about, I don't know, it was closer to the beginning of the school year where for a photo class I was out taking photos of Sage, the Frosh Squad building, and it was at night, and yeah, I was just like taking pictures of the front of Sage, and then all of a sudden like the CSS officer comes up to me and he's like, what are you doing? Just like taking photos of Sage, and he's like saying that that we got a complaint saying that like someone looking suspicious is like taking pictures of the front of Sage, and like there are 2 CSS officers there now, and then like on the walkie-talkie you can hear the dispatcher saying like repeating like what whoever called in said. And it's like saying like, oh, suspicious figure dressed in all black taking photos of people in their windows of Sage, and I'm like this is not what's happening right now. And like just the fact that like other students were like walking by as this was happening, and like both of their walkie-talkies on like full blast, just like calling me out for something that I didn't do. It's very strange, and like having to like show them the photos just to like make sure that like I didn't do this. And then afterwards, like they asked me to come in and like give a statement, which is like, I don't know, I feel like it's like kind of absurd to like have to go in and say like I didn't do anything wrong, because I didn't do anything wrong. And yeah, so like that was just the overall very weird and troubling experience that I had to have. So yeah.
We'd like to open the floor for any other experiences that folks have had with campus safety and security, if they were willing to share.
Hi, my name is Ale. I'm the co-chair of Vista. A couple of weeks ago, we had our LHM party, which also was like, it doubled as a birthday party because 4 of our board members had their birthdays like in the same week. It was in Perry Goat Room, and after, like the next day, after the party, we got an email. We got a lot of reports from both our advisors from the DC and CSS, basically saying that vandalism had occurred. There was damage done to Perry Goat Room, and basically that there was an investigation underway, and they thought that we were responsible for it. We had to go in, we had to make a statement, and what had happened was, like, our board member had spoken, basically there was a host there, and after the party was over, one of our board members began to do some like light cleanup. A host like walked through and like saw that the goat room was fine, like there was no damage at that point, and yet CSS was still like trying to blame this on us, and like they haven't told us like what the results of like this so-called investigation are, but the following week we had already had another space in reserve for a keynote speaker, they tried to cancel that reservation even though they'd already confirmed it. And when we told them it's in the contract, we cannot change the space, they then told us that we had to take pictures of the room before and after the event. And then after that event had concluded, there was a CSS officer who came to like do an inspection of the room. And so like it's very frustrating because like this investigation, like in my opinion, is baseless. And also they just decided, like they haven't concluded that it is our fault, and we are still having to deal, like they're still making us act like it is our fault, you know, like they're telling us like, well, it's not that it is, we have, like they haven't said that we're guilty, and yet they're acting like we are guilty.
So the BSU Halloween party was booked like after the LHM party, and so within like booking that space, we specifically booked the living room for spillover to ensure that people wouldn't have to wait outside, right? But when we booked the living room, we were warned actually that there had been a vandalism that occurred. They didn't give details about it, but they told us that it would be our job to clean the space and that we had to take like photos before and after too if we were to utilize it. And so we were like also very confused as to why students weren't being allowed into the space. So that also just kind of just seemed like an arbitrary change because we did have the space, but they just weren't. They said the cap is like 79 or like 76, and we're like, no, it's 202 because the living room is booked for this reason exactly. But students weren't allowed to be in the living room. Yeah, that's something that's obviously frustrating. But I think that like specifically when you think about like Hoxie, right? And from my understanding, it's like it's not CSS's jurisdiction. Yeah, so it's under the jurisdiction of the local police, right? And so like when students want to gather, if you're thinking about students wanting to gather, you have to reserve, like, or even throwing a party, you have to reserve a room, you have to book hosts, or a CSS, and the hosts are people who are supposed to, or hypothetically, that are supposed to go under this training where they're supposed to be able to crowd manage. And so the only way for thinking about like a BSU party specifically, if we want a large, like a event, right, that's curated for and made by Black students, we have to go through the institution, and we have to like, there's all these like different like limitations, right? And in order for students to get in, they have to engage people. They're not allowed to like just run in and out. Whereas like I think we all know like what Hoxie parties like are vaguely like, that it does not exist there because they don't need that to exist. And so if we had off-campus space for different affinities of students, then we wouldn't run into some of these problems because we wouldn't have to go through the institution, which is also something that.
I just want to say one brief thing. Like, there's just the ways in which Black spaces on this campus are just overly policed consistently. Whether it's registered parties, whether it's unregistered parties, whether it's people just walking around living their life, over and over again, there's this sort of like sense that like Black spaces have CSS, Black spaces and Black people have CSS called on them way more than any other type of space on campus. And that's a consistent thing that people have been complaining about for years upon years upon years. And so what does it look like for Black students to be in spaces that are made for us where people can't just arbitrarily call the police on us? That's why I think we're so passionate about these conversations about housing and Rice House.
Alexa?
Oh yeah, I'm Alexa, I'm a sophomore. Just wanted to share some like I live in Woodhouse right now, and that's like a whole process of how I got, like me and my also queer and female identifying roommate ended up in like a basement of a space, and also thinking about like the history of the house and like what the basement means and like being hidden down there almost. But like Woodhouse is like very occupied by like a lot of athletes of various like teams. Like we live next to these two massive white football men, and like sometimes feel scared enough because they're like slamming doors and walking through the hallways like after parties and stuff to like lock our door. And like to think about the fact that like their parties, like we walk in a lot of times like and they're going on in like the multiple spaces in Wood, and like I don't know if I've once seen a CSS officer shut them down, and like they destroy the space. Like destroy the space. We were trying to use the kitchen last night and there was like orange juice everywhere, and also the table was gone, and also like very interestingly like there was a swimming party going on next to the NBC formal, and like very clearly like segregated space of like white men in one room and like a lot of people of color trying to enjoy it. They I know like probably reserved that space because it was like a very official event. Door was closed and like clearly like
shut off of like, do not come in here because like we do not want you, because they were just like ridiculously rowdy. And like also like we live in the basement, and the basement like room is right there, and like there are often like very rowdy parties in there. Like they come into the bathrooms and like destroy the space as well. But I've like, and it's like clearly loud, and it's like off the road. Like you can see it's happening like through the windows. Like I don't think we've once, and we're often there like at those times of night. Like I don't think I've once seen a CSS officer shut anything down. Any of those like very obvious and like very loud spaces. And they're like most definitely like almost always black and like white men, and they just completely destroy the space, and nobody does anything about it.
I also want to share. I remember there being an incident my freshman year in the spring after Sankofa's spring show. We were having like a small gathering in, I think, Perry or Perry Goat Room, and it was just our team, and there weren't other like people there. It wasn't rowdy at all, nor like there wasn't basically justification for CSS to come and shut us down. But the officer who did respond, I think because of our music being really loud, came, and instead of coming in and I don't know, like telling us to shut it down and like keep it quieter and leaving, he like came, kind of stopped the music, started like walking around the space as he lectured us, and it was like a really condescending thing to have experienced. Like I've gone to parties in my entry that year, and like other parties with mostly white students, and that I had never experienced that before with the CSS officer, and it was really interesting because, I mean, I feel like it's not even the fact that CSS comes to our parties more, or our gatherings more than other students. It's the particular affect they have when they're dealing with us. Like it's, I'm Sankofa is it's a team of mostly people of color, mostly black students, and like I had never felt so like condescended to in that way, and I feel like that's something that only happens like when CSS is dealing with black students. So it was like a very like really disrespectful way of having them deal with us that I've just never seen before. And it really like also changed the entire tone of our gathering, so we didn't feel like we could gather in the same way that we were before because of that. So
So I'm Dominique, I'm a junior, and I remember like my first incident / like running with CSS where I realized like CSS was not on my side was actually after NBC COFA Tech, and if, for you guys that don't know anything about Tech, basically like we end at like midnight. A friend and I went to Sawyer to basically start our homework, and we were just so exhausted from Tech that we were like, okay, we're gonna take a 20-minute nap. But obviously we hadn't had sleep, and we were just so tired that like when the nerd bell went off, like that's what woke us up. We were like in a room on the 3rd floor, and we were like gathering our things, and it was about, when does it go off, at 2 o'clock?
2:30. 2 o'clock, it closes at 2:30.
Yeah, okay, so it's like 5 minutes after it's supposed to be shutting down. And we're like hustling out, and I see CSS, and I'm like, oh, thank God, CSS, they can let us out, because like the gate is down. Instead, they were like questioning us, why are you still here? What are your names? You need to come with us to make a statement. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. First of all, we were just in like a room upstairs. We fell asleep. And then one of the officers were like, oh, I checked all the rooms upstairs, and there was nobody there. And then I was like, pause. Because clearly you weren't doing your job. Because if you had actually checked the rooms upstairs, you'd have seen us like sleeping, and then just woken us up and asked us to leave. But instead, we were like interrogated. It was 2:30 in the morning instead of like working on our work. And I was like, this is crazy that I had to like go to CSS, make a statement at 2:30 in the morning when I'm already so exhausted. So this statement was of course a rant. And like, I just thought it was like so ridiculous because I looked at CSS and I was like, okay, like they're gonna like help us get out of the library. And instead that we were like interrogated for essentially like being good students and being in the library past closing. But I don't know, I just thought that was like that was extremely ridiculous. That was my freshman year experience. Yeah.
Also, I forgot a very key point in what happened the night that I had to submit a statement for CSS. So after I like agreed to go to submit a statement, we're driving along, and as they pull up onto Park Street, I see that there's a police car that's like parked there, and they stop and like roll down the windows just to speak to the officer, and the officer asks like if they got him, and they said yeah, it's just an art project. And I'm like very freaked out, and they roll off and then say, that's weird that they're here, like we didn't even call in the police, and which was just like, what is going on? And they like they said like, oh wow, like you're a star, like yeah, this doesn't happen often. I was like, why are you like calling me a star? Because like the police are here for like some shit that I didn't even do. And so that was very frustrating. I spoke to Letitia Haynes afterwards about that, and she explained that that CSS is like, the radio system that they use is like open, and so that anything that's transmitted through their radio system can also be picked up by the Williamstown PD, which is scary because if CSS doesn't respond to a dispatch, then the WPD would be the next step up to like come in and solve the problem. So I just think that like that's definitely something that's like should be addressed and like needs to be reworked and fixed, because that's just outrageous.
Can I just say, I'm Letitia Haynes. Hi. I don't know if they can hear everything, but there are certain times, certainly things that both Williamstown Police Department becomes aware of that, based on calls that have gone to CSS.
Thanks.
Okay, hi, my name is Vina, and I'm a freshman, and I'm taking RAD right now. And they actually told us the story of a person taking pictures outside of Frosh Quad. And the way that they said it, they forgot to mention that it was a black person. And they painted it as, oh, it was a weird individual in all black taking pictures of the windows. Like, we had to intervene, like, we're trying to get trying to make y'all safe. And now that I'm hearing it from your perspective, I'm kind of wondering why they forgot to mention that it was a black person, because that would have changed the entire tone of the story. And then it was like, now that I remember it, most of their speech to us was them reinforcing that, oh, we don't see color, we just like respond to whatever. And now that I'm thinking about it, it was a little weird, because now that I'm hearing it from you, it's just like, I'm confused.
I'm Shalia, I'm also a first year. I'm also in the same class, RAD class as Dina. And I do want to know, like, what kind of training does CSS get? Do they do anti-racism training? Because in that class, I feel like my experiences as a person of color and dealing with CSS are dismissive. Like, they didn't explain that you were a person of color, which would have changed the entire story to me, because black bodies are always going to be seen as threatening and dangerous. So I'm just wondering, are they even qualified to deal with students of color? That's my question.
Got one answer?
Yeah, let me just say this. I mean, there's definitely a lot of work to be done, not just in CSS on this campus. Again, Letitia Haynes, VP for Institutional Diversity and Equity. There have definitely been conversations and workshops that CSS has engaged in, as have the Williamstown Police Department and others in the surrounding community. But that's just the start. The work that you're talking about around bias is really moving hearts and minds. And so we are engaged in a process of looking at not just policies and procedures, but also these pieces that you're talking about, background bias. So I just wanted to offer that so you know, and several of us are involved in those conversations, and we'll be moving forward.
I think it's more than just hearts and minds, though, because I think holding the police and the CSS accountable is really important. So when things like this happen, there needs to be punishment for CSS officers. Like when these things are happening, there needs to be, the story needs to be told publicly, the officer needs to be named, so that people know that this officer is racist, and so that they can kind of, get a sense of their bearings. And then on the other side, I also want to share a couple stories, similar to a lot of stories that have been told, but at 4 a.m. in the data center, which is a 24-hour space, you can do
Okay, so, hey, beautiful people. It's 3:20, so we kind of want to like shift the conversation up slightly. I think everyone has said some really powerful things, and just want to acknowledge that. But we also just want to try and like cover these other topics. But feel free to like don't feel like these conversations have to end in this space. There are so many ways for us to continue to engage in these issues and these conversations outside of these space. So this is just to get those conversations started. And so there has been a recent sort of a few free speech happenings on campus. Isaiah, do you want to?
I actually wanted to direct the question to any faculty member if they would want to clarify what's going on with the conversation around a Chicago statement or free speech. We just haven't heard that and want to get some clarity.
What is that?
I don't know if there's not a faculty person in the room, but I'll just, so well anyway, it doesn't matter, I'm a faculty person too, so.
You're the president.
Professor of History and Judaic Studies, among other things. So there is a group of faculty that are circulating a petition requesting that Williams sign the Chicago Principles, which is a kind of high-level set of principles around encouraging the university. You can look it up online. It's a public document, but basically that encourages the university to have a stance towards speakers, which is that anybody that is invited should be allowed to be invited to the campus, that somebody in the campus community wants to have come. And I think about 18 schools have signed the Chicago Principles. Other schools, a couple of schools have created their own principles that are sort of the same, but somewhat more slightly nuanced in certain ways. Right now it's just a petition. There's not, and my sense is there's a debate among the faculty about its merits, the petition, but it hasn't come forward to even to a faculty meeting yet for a formal discussion or debate.
Is there a faculty meeting that will be planned around that?
I suspect the answer to that is yes, but it hasn't hit that level yet. Really, the petition only became, I think, visible to the faculty as a whole as they sent an email around maybe it was a week and a half ago, something like that, and then they're holding some forums to discuss the issue, and then, but I mean, just sort of not in the space of the faculty meeting, but I suspect probably next semester there will be some discussion in the faculty meeting.
Are these forums going to be open to students as well?
I don't know the answer to that, only not because I'm trying to, it's just there's nothing planned at the moment. There's no, you mean the actual things that are going on?
Well, the discussions that you
Oh,
mentioned.
I think right now those are
outside.
faculty discussions, but actually I don't know, honestly, because again, it's just like one group of faculty that has said, let's have these discussions, so I don't know where they've circulated it. I suspect if they're open to students, they'd be in daily messages, but they might be starting initially just to talk to each other.
I think that the conversation around free speech how we can open it to the rest of the group is beginning to think about the ways in which we've been affected by the discourse around free speech. So for example, one thing might be the show Beasting, another thing might be just like, again, ways in which folks will be and can be affected by the context of free speech and what that will mean. So if that's reflections on uncomfortable learning, just so that we have a consensus and understanding among students here around what does it mean to sort of implement a context of free speech, because initially that sounds ideal, like everyone should be able to be open to say what they want, or maybe not. And so just opening up the table to sort of, for a quick while, for us to sort of have that conversation maybe.
Does anyone want to give like a brief summary of uncomfortable learning and like the politics of free speech on the campus before we get into those experiences, the specific experiences? Preferably senior, anyone?
Yeah, preferably senior.
Can I just clarify something? I just wanted to clarify something that about the Chicago Principles, this petition's going around, it's pretty specific. It's not really about free speech, which is actually
That's helpful.
a right, which you all have to. It is, the Chicago Principles is very specifically around policies towards speakers coming to campus.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, it's narrower than free speech.
it's just interesting that because the discourse around it then gets open because because of our experience around like uncomfortable learning. For example, I'll just give my own specific experience around like uncomfortable learning. For example, like last year we had uncomfortable learning. So were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna
okay,
say
please.
So my experience as a senior with uncomfortable learning, I remember of note, my freshman year, they invited 2 controversial speakers. I think one was Suzanne Binker, who's like an avowed like anti-feminist. I don't know like the specifics of like her beliefs, but it's something like along the lines of, like gays like are like unnatural and like women belong in the kitchen, like very just like radical views like that. And because of the feedback on like the Facebook group when they invited it, it led to them disinviting her, and that caused like a few like articles and things like that on like Fox News and whatnot. And then later on in the year, I think it was like in February, right after February, like right after Black History Month, they invited John Derbyshire, who's an avowed white supremacist, like self-described white supremacist. And then President Falk disinvited him. And that just sparked a lot of conversation because it was, the rationale behind it, of course, is that like, oh, we need to hear these controversial opinions and have the dialogue with them face to face so that we can better prepare ourselves for the real world or something like that. But of course, the other end of that feedback was like, why are you inviting, you know, racist, sexist people to campus, possibly bolstering the views of anyone who might agree with them and like creating that space for people.
And then like following that event of John Derbyshire, the group ended up inviting like Charles Watson or someone
Murray,
like Charles Murray. Yeah. And so he's another he's also like a white supremacist, like eugenicist type thing. So then I think another group in response brought I think his name Dr. Graves, who's like a black biologist. And so they wanted to have like a debate between the two, but that did not end up happening. And so at the actual event, it was really apparent. It was like this older figure, just man just spouting his beliefs. And it was not like a productive conversation in the least. You just like, I left like wasting my time with this learning aspect. So that was really happening like our freshman year. So from there, like these conversations, like what does it mean to have something uncomfortable learning as a group, or what does that mean here at Williams?
So I have a quick comment on that. I went to a lot of the uncomfortable learning events last year, and a lot of the speakers that came had a lot of interesting rhetoric. I think that the group, which was a student group, tried to bring a lot of people that openly espoused conservative views that were at sometimes even extreme. And it was interesting, except for when you get to the point where they start to, you know, berate people for having service dogs because they're weak. Those are the types of tirades that the speeches could go into. And I think one of the major issues is that students on campus would appreciate having the experience of listening to a conservative speaker or a speaker who just has different views than them. But the issue is that they come, they speak, they spout their message. Students may ask questions at the end, and it becomes a very volatile, confrontational situation. I think if we developed a system like that, that was more so based on, like, let's say a debate, where either students or faculty could engage on different issues so that, you know, us as students don't, you know, if we want to attend these events, we don't just have to sit back in the room and, you know, basically feel offended and not have any opportunity to engage the speaker in a productive way or to engage the room in a productive way.
I have a kind of question / concern about the process of legitimation that debate espouses. So Charles Murray, for example, author of The Bell Curve, a literal eugenicist who thinks that brown and black people are genetically, biologically disposed to being less intellectually developed than white folk. Like, when we bring somebody like that to our campus and we say, in the name of academic freedom, in the name of exploration, we're going to debate you. You know, like we give legitimacy to these beliefs. We say that is a valid side to take. And I think at this moment in our political climate, more than any other in recent history, it's important to consider the proximity between rhetorical violence and material violence. You know, what is our responsibility here as a college community with marginalized people, people who are not protected? The institution offers a very thin barrier to begin with. And when we invite these kind of speakers, people who come in with, frankly, what can be considered genocidal ideologies, or ideologies that are founded at the heart of this country's like white supremacy, what kind of rhetorical damage and what kinds of subsequent material damage do we allow to occur in our space? And I want to remind everybody of the kind of larger context of academic freedom and this sort of like a high-level principle, which I read as a kind of binding principle. And that's a different thing. It's not just a statement, it's actually a policy. The larger context is that UChicago brought Steve Bannon to their campus. Steve Bannon is an alumnus of UChicago, and he went and he said what Steve Bannon says, that immigrants are dirty, immigrants don't belong here, that, he upheld the tenets of this Trump administration, and at UC Berkeley last year, President Carol Christ, actually hosted an entire week of free speech events. Free speech is a misnomer here. During Berkeley's free speech, members of the elite, ultra right wing, were brought to speak on campus. And the college Republicans, the Berkeley College Republicans, came and showed up. Many people also came to show up. And this points us to another sort of issue at stake here, which is that, there is an investment by people like Steve Bannon, like Milo Yiannopoulos, to cultivate an elite right-wing intellectual base. Is that what we're going to allow to happen at Williams College in the name of academic freedom? For whom? Freedom for whom?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment to build off what Zoe was saying. Just thinking about how these conversations about affinity housing, about all the topics that have been going on here, are actually really, really deep. If you think about what is our college's commitment, what communities is our college committed to keeping safe and protecting in this current political moment. And I don't mean just in rhetoric, I'm talking about capital, right? Are we actually committed to investing in affinity housing for students who that would make them feel safer, or that's a thing that people want to do? Are we how are we following through materially with commitments to communities on this campus? When people are speaking out against CSS, what's going to happen after this space, right? Is there going to be a follow through? And I think a lot of times these things happen where stuff goes down, right? And then afterwards, the administration or whatever comes and tries to people complain, so now we have to address it, right? And I'm thinking about this free speech thing, right, as an opportunity to see are students going to engage in the actual process of as this is going down instead of a thing that happens and then afterwards it's now we've opened up for hate speech to come to our campus and now we have to talk to the students about it, right? So I'm thinking about how do we have decision-making processes on this campus that actually be valuing the student input in a material way instead of having stuff go down behind our backs. I don't know. I don't know all the conversations that have been going down about changing free speech policy so that more conservatives talk can come to this campus. But I know that students haven't been involved in that. And that's where I'm worried is how are we building accountability with the actual power structure in our college. So when stuff goes down with CSS, when stuff goes down with affinity housing, if these decisions are being changed, I want folks in this room to be part of that process as this important decisions are being made instead of being come back to afterwards with now we have to change, I don't know, we messed up the policy, I'm sorry. I don't know.
I just want to remind everyone that you don't need to bring a speaker to learn about something. If you want to learn about, about how white nationalists believe in eugenics or the extermination of black and brown people, just go to Breitbart.com. You do not need to bring them. And if you are that invested and demanding that you can bring whoever you want, it kind of reveals a little, not so much about your desire about free speech, but more about what conversation you believe should really be brought onto campus and what you should be extremely validated. And there's a reason that in some countries, example Germany, you can't show the swastika because there is this historical process, this historical destruction of people, and here in the U.S., 200 years, 400 years of enslavement, of genocide, everything, and now we're going to pretend that it's just this little intellectual, hot potato. And so it isn't, and at the end, you can just all find it on YouTube. You do not need to spend school money on them.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I'm a first year, and I agree with all of your points. I feel like these conversations to get these speakers are not even valid because there aren't even spaces where students who would be affected by these speakers feel comfortable. So if you're investing school's money into getting these speakers, but you don't even have spaces where these students can be themselves, it's like I get that speaker's account on a daily basis. Like who said I can just talk to my peers and get that account?
Right.
I don't need someone to come to that and tell me if I don't even have a place where I can live with other Black people. So I feel like it's just a matter of priorities that the school should look into. Like, are you validating people? Like, I mean, obviously this would be like the upper, like right wing, more than likely white, upper class of 1%. So why are you validating those people instead of people who are already disadvantaged?
I do want to also say that with one of the bigger issues with uncomfortable learning, especially my freshman year, also in Philomine, by the way, was that they're getting funds from like shady like alumni dealer, like donators, same thing, donors, like alumni donors who like, and they wouldn't like necessarily reveal like who they were, and that's how they were funding a lot of these speakers. They weren't like getting college funds, but I do think that they have like become like a registered college group now, so I'm not sure even if what their status is this year.
I also think that brings up a conversation on the politics of decision making that is existing within the campus, and then how that makes ramifications on sort of our infrastructure for the allocation of resources. So and I strongly suggest folks, and I know that President Mendel will be like focusing on this sort of responses to the accreditation report that would happen in the last year, because in the accreditation report, there's an analysis of how like power is sort of delineated within the institution. And so if the power is like sort of existing within sort of like our committees and these sort of decentralized authorities within the campus, we can also sort of imagine ways in which decision making could happen on the allocation of resources. So for example, what does assembly look like? Like this sort of aspect of sort of speaking about the issues seems to me somewhat scary, because I think all of us in the back of our heads know that there is a committee that will be created on that. And then it sort of brings into the politics of representational politics. So then possibly Soha, right, or me, because I'm just so articulate, right, is heard on the basis of a lot of these issues, then I'm asked to then join a committee, right? So then on top of like doing all of my homework, I'm now asked to do like the institution's labor, right? Again, going back to the context of the captive maternal, right? In which that's how the decision making will happen, right? Now I'm holding a voice, and then again, within that space, I'll become a minority. I just want us to recognize sort of the politics of this space, right? Now a conversation around a town hall, right? Which brings a different context of what democracy would look like. Imagine now if we had, I don't know, a couple $1 million to now make decision makings based off of the coalition that's being brought here. Like who is represented in this room, and what if there was an organized process for now this room to be turned into, okay, say I if you now want to move on to affinity housing, but that infrastructure is actually not part of, to me, the most democratic process of sort of talking about our issues that we've seen, to me, in my 2 years on this campus. It feels like 4, right? But again, like how like sharing conversation and issues can turn into a solution.
I think to me that's interesting, because I think in theory that's what CC is supposed to be. That's a whole nother thing. But like, what if like there was a CC, like as you're saying, like this town hall is meant for us to allocate these funds. Like what if it's like a truly like democratic process where we feel that we aren't being misled, we aren't being belittled, we aren't being talked down to because we don't understand the process of funding or anything like that. We can actually truly get what we feel needs to be done for all of us, truly make this our space for however many years we're here.
Hi, I'm Ayana. I'm a junior this year. I just wanted to pick up on something that we were all talking about as far as uncomfortable learning distancing. In that, I think it's really, I want to make really clear to the admins and other faculty here that our issues are not, like, we're using these specific issues because these are particular examples that we can think of that are, can't just be brushed aside as like an individual problem. These are things like patterns that we're seeing over the course of our 4 years here. And really the question I think
I think Cecilia was mentioning upstairs, like, what is the institution committed to, like, on uncomfortable learning for who? Like, we're doing a lot of uncomfortable teaching in the entry and learning that we're going to be uncomfortable the entire time here, but then we're also the ones who need to do more uncomfortable learning with these, like, being nice, calling them radical views, but like racist, like these are racist people that we're being asked to, like, you know, come to terms with as if, since, you know, as young as I can remember, like, I knew that I was black. Like, why is the discomfort having to be, like, targeted towards a specific group of people? I think is the issue, and it's not that, right, because I think some of the pushback from people that I talked to about uncomfortable learning was, like, you don't have to show up to these events. But two issues with that. One is that this is supposed to be our home, like we talked about, and as we just mentioned, like, we don't even have a space. We don't even have, you can't even pretend that this is supposed to be our home, right? But then, so why are you inviting, like, threatening people into our home? And also that this is threatening. This is not just words. This is not free speech. This is not, like, the liberal terms that we try to describe it with. This is not any of that. This is, you know, this is dripping into the classroom. So when you talk about the white supremacists who talk about, like, you know, if you get into a car with black people or an elevator with black people, just stay quiet and get out as soon as you can, like, things like that. If we're going to, like, we're talking about validate those views, which we are by bringing them here, that means it's okay for someone in the classroom to then bring up that discussion just playing devil's advocate. That's not playing devil's advocate, that's violence. And that's not okay to just say, like, well, you don't have to show up to the event. I have to go to class. I have to sit in my poli-sci seminar and hear some fool talk about, like, well, just consider this. Like, that guy that was supposed to come here literally said that, like, black people are not human. I'm not going to consider that in my classroom. I'm really, like, no. So I think that's something that the institute needs to consider is, like, who are we okay with making uncomfortable? Why are we so driven to make those particular people uncomfortable? And how are we going to, if we're so insistent, this is how people learn, through discomfort, then we at least need some institutional support to get through all the discomfort that you are thrusting upon us.
Hi, I'm Audrey, and going off of your point, I think over the course of my time at Williams, I've noticed continuously how the theater department and by extension the college has continued to enact violence and trauma against black folk on this campus. I mean, if you look at the Underground Railroad production as well as Beast thing, like, and Ocean Vuong mentioned at his reading that safe spaces are spaces where people can be allowed to, you know, be themselves, assert their identities, be themselves. But a black woman in the Record article on Beast Things said that she felt like she had herself was suppressed. She wasn't allowed to be herself. And there's a structural investment in the dehumanization of black bodies. People pay to watch black bodies be demeaned and dehumanized, like, on stage, but also, like, on campus in real life. And we have to interrogate where the money goes. Like, we have, like, why are we investing in anti-black violence and trauma? Why are we doing this?
And also playing with that, just like considering like what types of stories are being told about black bodies on this campus in the theater department, and like how that can be very problematic, as in like the only productions that have been happening so far have been very offensive to a huge portion of people, especially the black communities. And like, why is it that when you think about portraying black bodies on stage, why is it always in this fashion that we have to portray black bodies? Why are we always trying to return to looking at black bodies in distress instead of uplifting and celebrating black bodies? Why isn't that on stage? Because that's important.
I think that within this conversation, there's like a focus, and it's helpful for us to also think about micro and the macro, right? So like in the context of like uncomfortable learning, free speech, the whole conversation that we were recently happening was in the context of the world, right? We're dealing with the reality that the president is who he is. We're dealing with the reality that the alt-right is, right? We're dealing with like climate crises. We're dealing with anti-black violence. We're dealing with that as a whole, right? And the mission of our institution, in order to connect our institution, right, is to sort of learn, right? Because the reality is that, like, one, I don't fully believe that there is clarity amongst everyone, even amongst the institution. One, what is liberal arts? Two, what is the mission of the college amongst the students? And if we're not to have a consensus, and again, this is going back to the accreditation report, because I'm quoting that, right? The college does not have a sort of consensus of what even liberal arts actually signifies, and then how to take that into the context of what that would mean in the world. So based off of what I'm hearing, right, without a mission statement, are we then saying that the college's desire is to move us towards consulting? Are we saying that now our place in our society, right, is to now just manage discourse, manage people, right, move to Wall Street? Because like their understanding, right, is sure, we're not a pre-professional institution. But how can we really think about that, right? Because the idea of pre-professionality is connected to how we're not a pre-professional school, but we're a liberal arts college, right? That we're not moving into these ways. But again, I ask us, what is then our responsibility within the world? If we're stating that our responsibility within the world is now to look at how we teach, how we learn, right? Then what is now our context in relationship to settler colonialism? What is our context to, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not a matter of discourse. It's not a matter of who's being able to speak. But if the institution is naming that our time should be spent learning, right, and our learning is now being spent debating my existence, right, then again, what is then the goal of my point being here on the outside, on the macro? What happens when I leave, right? Is now my time to sort of be delineated for the rest of my life to prove my existence? Or wait, what would happen if now the institution's goal, right, the institution's mission is to now sort of deconstruct racism? What does it mean now the institution is now naming itself to say, we're not only reactively sort of responding to the needs of the violences of the world, because the purple bubble is just some way that we get to sort of, create a discourse of how we're separate, right? But no, we're implicated. $2.5 billion, or however large our endowment, means that we're deeply implicated into the structures of injustice in the world. What are we investing in? And how, again, is that propelling the mission of other things that I'm not so concerned I want to be a part of? What are we doing about prison? Are we investing in it, right? Because it's connected to our mission, and our mission is connected to what we're here to do, right? Our money in the school historically has been put into ending government, right? Like the Haystack Monument is an emblem of how the institution's mission can be very much connected to creating missionary movements, and then we get the settler memory of them calling our building Mission. But we don't have a mission, right? We don't have a desire as an institution? I think not. So I'll end by saying this. I'll end by saying this, right? When I came to Williams College and saw the Haystack Monument, I saw Mission, I saw the Mills Dorm, I saw the ways in which years ago our institution was being implicated in the huge violences of settler colonialism, right? How again, we were not disconnected from the violence of the world at that time. I think, what would it look like 100 years, 150 years from now, when, if the school still exists, students look back and say, what were they doing in 2018? Were they naming buildings after people who were, implicated in the violences of I don't know who or what, right? What does Horn mean? Like, is Horn now our Haystack Monument of our generation? And that can, again, ask, what is our mission and what is the mission of our bodies in the institution?
So we're coming to a close, but first we wanted to open the space for two final conversations. I'll just name them both and then we can just work them together however you guys want. So one is the upcoming renovations to all 4 of the data center buildings. There's currently a committee formed called the DC Building Community Committee. I'm on it, Jasmine's on it, Shauna, VP Haynes, a few other people in this room are on it. And it's essentially a committee that's with the responsibility of reimagining what all four of the data center buildings will look like in the coming future. So there have been talks about renovating the buildings for decades, but this is when it's actually going to be happening sometime within the next few moments. And so I want to open the space. Well, first I'm going to say what the second topic is, but then I'm going to want to open the space for us to talk about what you guys would actually want to see in that renovation, what you guys don't want to see, what the significance of Rice, Harvey, and Jeunesse are for you, what the significance could be, the things you love about the buildings, the shortfalls, or the things you wish the buildings had. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I also want to open the space a little bit. Actually, yeah, let's just do that. And then we'll spend like the last 5 or 10 minutes at the end looking towards Black History Month and thinking about what you guys want for that. But that'll be a shorter conversation. So for now, let's just talk about the data center. What does that mean for you? What does it not mean? What could it mean?
For me, the data center was why I decided to come to it. And it was, I didn't do any of the regular tours. I just wanted to walk around and look at the campus and kind of find where, like, obviously, like, where the Black people are, like, how are people living? Because from what I knew about Williams, I knew that it was a school in the middle of nowhere. And it was a really good school in the middle of nowhere. So I knew, like, okay, hopefully I can survive and hopefully I can feel comfortable in this space. So after one of the seniors, the junior at the time, she took me on a tour of like the Davis Center building and she told me like the purpose behind like this building and like how this space is being used. I felt like, wow, I can't believe I go to a school where they dedicated these three houses to people of color and that there's actually a space where people use the space and it's welcoming and it's something that you can look forward to each week and at the end in going to the data meetings. And it was definitely something that I was like really interested in and wanted to be connected to. So as soon as I found out about like the building committee, wanting to be a part of enhancing the buildings and enhancing that community, that made me want to come to it.
I'm just thinking, like, I guess, at least think about Rice House in general, like, in the renovation process, one thing I think is really nice is, like, the chalkboard wall upstairs where, like, how different alum will come and sign it. 'Cause I think one year, I think my sophomore year, I think they'd do some renovation on that wall and, like, the whole, like, the chalk was, like, either removed and then people would come back and say, oh, wait, like, that was, like, my, like, little legacy as, like, a part of this community. So I think, like, let's say if for some reason they need to do renovations in that space, it'd be nice to somehow keep those, even as mementos to show what it was like. It's like literally like a history wall of people who've come.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great point. The other thing I'm thinking about is how the word monument comes from the Latinate. It's Latinate root, and it means to mourn. Memoriale, to mourn, to remember. And so the question I'm asking is, who is it that we're mourning? Who are the bodies that cannot be mourned? You know, the Davis Center, the Multicultural Center, was formed because of student protest. You know, students, a multiracial coalition of students got together and they actually surrounded the building. And in order to get this space, they put their bodies, you know, out there, in the line of sight and also in the line of potential repercussion from the administration. And so I think there, you know, while we're talking about naming, it's important to think about, again, ways of remembering those who cannot be remembered, those invisible subjects on whose bodies the foundation of this school lays. You know, and that includes Native peoples, you know, who are this plaque here in memory of Colonel Ephraim Williams. You know, like, there's swaths of histories that the institution does not want to remember, quite frankly, and cannot remember. And I think it has a stake in not remembering, because going back to what Isaiah is saying, if we are to really remember and to even begin, like, imagining what mourning could look like, the current mission of the school as it stands, as this sort of, I don't know, unquestioning bastion of progressive something would shatter. And so I think to speak concretely to what the data center could look like and renovations could look like, I mean, small steps, you know, we can start with remembering the histories of violence that have been enacted on that site and the efforts to counter those violences.
Hi, I'm Shane. In addition to memorial space, which I think would be just incredible, like I think like making sure that all of the space in all these data center houses are like dedicated to their specific mission, which is serving like all the students of the campus who need it. I think there should be like perhaps like this is a weird request, but like office space or like some space in which like student activism can happen and work within there, because as it stands, Rice House is sort of like a really cramped space. Like we have like this really small blue room, and that's where all of the board meetings are. But imagining like dedicated space in which students can get together and work on changing the institution, because that's the spirit of what these buildings should be. Like even despite the fact that like Rice House is not named after like a black student, yet the name of that building and the building itself is emblematic of what being black and existing as a black person at Williams is. And so like making sure that every inch of that space is dedicated to that, whether that be office space or like if we're gonna do renovations and keep the general layout the same, like maybe like redoing the attic and the basement, so that's more space for social space, like what Joseph was talking about with the chalkboard wall, like imagine like a whole floor with this huge wall of that. Because as it stands, like we have this one chunk of space that constantly has all these overlapping like chalk scribbles on it, and imagine like this dedicated space where like you have a bit more permanence or whatever mark you're leaving. Or just like more creative space, like anything that will leverage the ability for that space to become a compounded legacy of all like different people of color and their experiences here.
Can I ask a question? When you say creative space, what would you envision some things to be if you needed more creative space? Like what would be some physical aspect?
Maybe like dedicated studio space. Well, I feel like I'm actually asking my wish list. Like think of like even like a mini art studio or something. I really like creating things. I feel that I've never even set with like just those art things, like like amazing things like that. And yet all the creative work that happens there in Rice House. So thinking of like stuff like that, you know, offices in general, that are dedicated space for people to do work. Yeah, just something like that. Maybe like a small version of like a creative suite that's available in society.
On second thought, we actually are going to end the event and we will finish the conversation specifically about the DC renovation at a later time, to be respectful of everyone's time and to also be respectful of like the weight and like concentration and energy that needs to go into this specific conversation because it's such a vital space for so many people on campus. As I mentioned earlier, I would not have survived freshman year, and I clearly would not have survived my entire time here if not for like Rice House and what it means and the things that happen and the sort of like energy that's created there. So, Isaiah?
Soha is taking down names of folks who are supporting affinity housing. That's, I guess, the start of a petition. So if you're also interested in like writing down your name and giving us a re-up on that, please do so.
I'll send it out to the listserv afterwards as well.
Yeah.
So just in terms of closing remarks, does anyone have anything to say before we close out the space?
I would like to thank the BSU board for creating this space for all of us.
I would also like to thank you guys for coming, for sharing what's passionate, for sharing the things that you are passionate about, for giving your personal histories, your energy, your time, your love, your pain. Thank you so much. You are powerful. You are enough. You are more than enough. And I'm so happy that you guys gave the time to us today. Thank you.
Please get some food. There's food still.